Thanks again, everyone, for joining. You have Mike McGrory here from BLab. I started out at BLab about 5 years ago as one of our standards analysts, so I had the privilege of working with a few hundred B Corps over the years on certifying your companies. And now I focus on our data and analytics and also help out with our B Corp Climate Collective, particularly with the group that we'll be meeting with today within our Climate Advocacy Group. I serve as a liaison between BLab and our B Corps that are very active in that group. So thanks again for joining us today. Our webinar is titled Making Our Voices Heard. We'll be sharing a 2022 climate legislation outlook today with our close partner Ceres and a few guest B Corps that'll be here to join us and share their lessons from the road. So looking forward to sharing some of the wins from last year, as well as some of the big milestones we're hoping to achieve next year. So very good to see a nice sized group joining us, especially after coming back from a holiday break. So really appreciate you being here. So we can go to the next slide, which is our agenda. So just to give you the outlook of the meeting today, I'll start us off with a bit of context setting, which will be followed by Ann Kelly at Ceres, who do a legislative recap from this year and then our look ahead to next year with climate legislation. Very lucky to have two experienced B Corp advocates here in Avi Garbow from Patagonia and Kevin Lee from Dr. Bronner's. Very grateful to have them. And then that'll be followed by my colleague Holly Ensign Barstow from BLab US and Canada to share a BLab policy agenda update. And we'll be sure to save some time at the end for question and answers. So encourage folks to add your questions to the chat as we go, and then we'll be sure to bring them back to the group at the end of the meeting. And anything we can't get to, certainly we'll follow up over email there as well. So this is a Zoom meeting format. So if you'd like to share your video, welcome you to do so, and we'll all be muted as well. So go on to the next slide. Before we begin the briefing itself, I'd like to start and take a few moments to acknowledge that every community owes its existence and vitality to generations before us from around the world who contributed their hopes, their dreams, and their energy to making the history that led to this moment. Some were brought to a place against their will. Some were drawn to a place in hopes of a better life, as my ancestors were, and some have lived in place for more generations than can be counted. Truth and acknowledgement are critical towards building mutual respect, and they are essential if we to solve the climate crisis that we are facing. So it is crucial that we acknowledge the truth. I'm calling into this briefing from the ancestral lands of the Lenape peoples. And further, I acknowledge that at least 8 individual tribal nations are tied to the lands that make up the state of Pennsylvania, where I'm privileged to live. I pay respect to their elders, past and present, and I encourage everyone on this call to take the needs of Native peoples into consideration when forming climate solutions, while also using the power of business, along with our political power that we're building to address the wide-ranging social issues within our society. My hope is that we can improve our land and improve our society for the next generation. Thank you. I'd like to continue with a bit of additional context on where we are in terms of the outcomes of global warming. So we're on the same page there. You know, whenever I get a group that when we're dialoguing about climate, I think it is important to share the math. So if we look at the chart on the left, this is one of our key outcomes for climate, and that's the parts per million chart. Right now we're at about 415 parts per million. So that's basically the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. The UN target and widely accepted North Star is around 350 parts per million. So that's a level we saw in the 1980s. So certainly have a way to go on this curve. From a 2021 annual emissions expectation, we're expected to increase by 5%. versus last year. The UN target that I think is very important to note is an 8% decrease every year. So certainly almost a world away from the future that we need to see to essentially have a livable planet here. Some silver linings though, so quite far away as of today. Some silver linings though that in 2020 we did see a decrease of 6% in emissions, which was close to UN goal, by far the best year we've ever had. That was driven by the COVID legislation and reduction in flights and impact of COVID. So we at least have lived through what it feels like to have a 6% reduction. And I think we are certainly in a fork in the road where we can go back to pre-2020 growth levels, or we can take a fork the other way and try and continue to decrease our emissions every year. In my own analysis and that of the B Corp Climate Collective, certainly seems like we'll need climate legislation to get us there, similar to the way we flatten the COVID curve and are flattening the curve. Seems very likely that government legislation is needed to flatten the curve we're looking at here on the slide. Just want to share two other insights that have came across my radar in the last year and a half that have led to an interest in doubling down on legislative work. One insight was through working with a B Corp that's in the construction industry and the challenges they were having with meeting the UN goals. In the construction industry, it's a competitive bidding marketplace. So when they wanted to try and switch to a higher cost cement that had better CO2 emissions, or when they wanted to purchase offsets for their cement products, at some point the cost impact was quite difficult for them to win in the bids. So that led me to think, okay, there's certainly a limit that businesses can voluntarily do this without all businesses having to move it in lockstep, so that one isn't disadvantaged to the other, which I believe is something only the government can do. Make sure everybody, just like the flight reductions that we'll likely need if all airlines reduce their flights together versus just one airline voluntarily doing so and being at a disadvantage business-wise. So that was one insight I wanted to relay to the group. And then the other is, interestingly, from the current Build Back Better plan that we'll hear more about today. I work with many B Corps that voluntarily offer family and medical leave, such as parental leave when a family has brought in a newborn. And when thinking about scaling that, I think we certainly recognize at BLab that we're not going to be able to certify every business and have every business voluntarily offer medical leave. But interestingly, even in our current Build Back Better plan, that there is medical leave present for nearly a majority of adult Americans. So certainly a large group, and we're within 30 days of achieving that. So when applying that to climate, I do definitely recognize the power of voluntarily regenerating supply chains and reductions and offsets to build a model to show others how it's done. But at the same time, think that having legislation is a major part of the scaling solution. So it's, as Jennifer from Native often says, it's more of an and situation. It's regenerating and reducing and advocating. So I look forward to having everyone learn about our advocating and advocacy opportunities today as that third leg of the climate stool. So thanks again for hearing our context here. I look forward to keeping in touch during our Q&A session later on. And now I'll pass to Ann Kelly from our partner Ceres, who we work very closely with on our advocacy work and really appreciate their years and years of experience on the Hill.
Well, thanks so much, Mike, and so nice to be with all of you. I am a huge fan of the BLab, and Having been at Ceres for a long, long time, I've often thought of the BLab as the organization that really put into place in a real way so many of the values that Ceres were part of our origins way back in 1989. You all are walking the talk and talking the walk as benefit corporations, and I have the utmost respect for the process that you go through and the work that all of you are doing. Mike's comment and the title of this session takes us back a little bit. I want to just spend a couple moments on that word recap of 2021 and remind us in what could seem like very challenging times, just how fortunate we were to see a brand new presidential administration take the helm last January. If you think back to the 4 years prior, we suffered so many unfortunate events, including terrible destruction of our environmental law infrastructure, regulatory rollbacks, and of course, the deeply unfortunate departure from the Paris Agreement. And though it's not listed on multiple slides, as a general matter, we should think of 2021 as the year that the US really stood up again on the climate front and on environmental protection more generally. We re-entered the Paris Agreement. We were present just now in COP26. The president established a really important NDC, nationally determined contribution, interim target of 50% reduction in emissions by 2030. He did that in April over Earth Day. He, of course, appointed the first Native American Secretary of the Interior in Secretary Holland, which is of the utmost importance. And I very much appreciate, Mike, your land acknowledgement. Know that this administration is deeply committed to land preservation and to, again, making huge strides over the last administration. There really can't be any comparison. I suspect Avi may talk a little bit about that, having spent some time at the EPA, but just know that in every possible area, we have seen tremendous progress from this administration. There is, once again, a real commitment to the missions of the Department of Energy, the Department of, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the DOI in particular. So this is an administration that's committed to climate progress, climate leadership, and in particular, equity and environmental justice. So with that as a backdrop, where are we at this point? Well, just for a brief history of the most recent important events, you all know that we passed the Bipartisan Infrastructure Framework, which is really a notable accomplishment. I don't know how many people appreciate, if you've been in DC, you know that for the last 8 years, 12 years, we would talk about trying to get infrastructure through. It was enormously difficult. President Biden and Nancy Pelosi deserve a tremendous amount of credit, as well as Senator Schumer, for making this happen. And also thanks to our Republican colleagues who did the hard work of hammering out an agreement. So you see the numbers here on this slide. Really important historic investment, in particular in public transit and in EV charging and infrastructure and electric buses. So really important job generating infrastructure, important to be replacing all of those lead pipes, which we've heard so much about. So I just want to emphasize this was a major accomplishment. And of course, it is not a climate bill and it is not enough. But that I'll hit on the next slide. But on this slide, let me also highlight the importance of methane. We've come to appreciate just how dangerous methane emissions are. You're all familiar with the pledge made at COP26 on methane reduction from many countries. We now have rules put out by the EPA on methane regulation. There's going to be another set of rules that are going to come out in the spring that are even more important. And I've just highlighted a few bullets here of what these rules are going to do. There's actually a fair bit of consensus on the importance of these rules, even from the oil and gas industry, though we certainly expect pushback on some of the details. There's also currently a methane reduction program in the Build Back Better bill. So this is an area where we can expect some advocacy, and we're happy to give you that guidance, by the way, come the first of the year and into the spring. Also wanted to highlight environmental justice and equity because the administration has committed itself in a serious way, more than any other administration, to beginning to tip the scales of environmental injustice in favor of those who have been so overburdened, vulnerable communities, communities of color, frontline communities. And the way that they've done that is through an initiative called Justice 40, which is a pledge by the president that 40% of all expenditures on climate and environmental protection will go toward those communities, those most vulnerable communities. That's never been done before. Let's make sure we track those expenditures. Let's make sure that that becomes concrete and that we're all paying attention to the implementation. Similarly, the National Environmental Policy Act is just one example that I highlight here of a law that's been, it's actually our oldest environmental law, that's designed to look at new projects and make sure that our siting policies are fair and that we're fully appreciating the environmental impact of any major project. And all too often in examining those environmental impact statements, we have not heard the voices of those most vulnerable groups and vulnerable communities. This administration is committed to reversing that. And again, let's pay attention and find ways that we can weigh in to make sure that that kind of equity takes place. So plenty to do in the environmental justice area, just scratching the surface here, but stay tuned because we want to make sure we are weighing in. The next slide, we'll go over the more immediate steps, which are around, of course, the Build Back Better Act. We are both so close and so far from passing this crucial bill that I am going to be asking you at this moment for what I call the sprint to the holidays, for this one last push from you as business leaders to weigh in on the importance of this bill. I'm going to ask my colleague Amna to put something in the chat, which is a blast that many of you may have received from us last week that just outlines the action steps that you can take. And we've tried to give you many on-ramps to your advocacy here, but let's first just take a look at the bill itself and refresh our memories as to what's in it. Many of you remember the first rendition of the bill was 3.5 trillion. That included some corporate tax increases that were wildly unpopular with many of our colleagues in the business community. And so you should know right off the bat that those tax increases are no longer part of the package, and that the package itself is reduced significantly to 1.75 trillion. As all of you know, when we think about regulating climate, we've got about 3 basic choices. We can do a market mechanism where we price carbon, and hats off to all of you who've been active in the carbon pricing debate and through the Citizens Climate Lobby. That looks like it's not going to be part of this package, but stay tuned for when we can build, ideally, a bipartisan carbon pricing bill when we get back to regular order. We also do command and control. So we regulate, we set up rules and penalties, and that was also potentially part of this bill. We had something, an incentive-based structure called the Clean Electricity Standard, the Clean Electricity Performance Program. That did not stay in the bill, unfortunately. So what is our third alternative? Well, it's investment, essentially. And what you're seeing here is a really solid $555 billion in investment in the clean energy sector. This just makes sense. This has bipartisan support. This has support from the sector itself. This kind of investment is no different than the historic investments the US has made in the interstate highway system, in the railroad system. Basically, it's investing in our future energy system, in our competitiveness. Simply makes all the sense in the world, and is probably the least controversial action that we could have taken. So there is every reason to get behind these climate provisions in the bill. I don't have a slide on the human infrastructure elements because that's not my direct beat, but needless to say, those are crucial. I think we would all agree. And it's helpful when companies are getting behind Build Back Better. Some are only comfortable saying, we support the climate elements of the bill. That's completely fine. But it's also really helpful to say business supports Building Back Better. Simply the whole package. It's one package at this point. So what are the steps at this point that we're going to go through? Well, as you see on the slide, as you know, it passed the House of Representatives before Thanksgiving. It's now in the hands of the Senate. I'll be perfectly candid here. We probably have 49 votes. We need Senator Manchin from West Virginia. He is unpredictable and raising certain concerns about the bill at this point, which we don't feel are legitimate. It would be a tragedy if we lose this entire package because of one vote. So it goes without saying, any and all leverage you have in West Virginia, please pick up the phone and call yourself as a business person. If you have any reach, any connections of any sort in the state, by all means, please leverage. Feel free to call up Senator Manchin anyway, just because you're a business in the US that cares about our future. And he is in an incredibly powerful position right now and needs to be pushed. In terms of direct Advocacy, we've got a few vehicles for you here. The first is a sign-on letter. And again, I direct your attention to the chat where Amna has put in our entire sort of advocacy blast that includes the sequencing of events that you're likely to expect. We have a sign-on letter. We'd love to have you join. We're looking to have 1,000 businesses sign this letter so that we can accurately say that businesses are supporting Build Back Better, that businesses from 50 states are behind the package. The reason I say 1,000 is because just to get the press attention, this has to be a very large number. I've been asked recently about small and mid-sized businesses, and let me just underscore that our friends from the red states generally prefer to hear from small and mid-sized businesses. That is what we've been told repeatedly. Most Americans work for small businesses, as I'm sure you know, and there's very much a kind of a heart of America kind of story from small and mid-sized businesses. So please don't suggest that you are not large enough to be a part of this. I think the BLab companies have particular credibility because of your overall commitment writ large. And therefore, I strongly encourage you to join this letter. This is an easy lift. Do not need a CEO signature. And the link is right there. What about your own statements of support or social media posts or tweets? Couldn't be more important than right now over the next 3 weeks. We expect that Senate vote just before the holiday. Really important to get these out, to amplify them. The White House is asking us directly for this level of support. And of course, we want to provide it. There are likely to be some targeted ads. If you want to be a part of those, let us know. We have a whole ad campaign specifically in West Virginia. And we're also doing a number of Hill meetings to just make sure our congressional moderate friends are staying on board. Because again, once it passes in the Senate, knock on wood, and they will be making minor changes to the bill. Again, we're trying to push, don't make changes to it. Let's keep it as solid as it is. But it will go back to the House. And we will need one more vote there. And when it goes back to the House, we'll also have to push our progressive friends to say, you know, there may have been some tweaks to the bill. Let's hope the family medical leave stays in. Let's hope that all those vital human infrastructure elements stay in the bill. But they may be cut in a way that our progressive friends raise some doubt. To be candid with you, it looks like the climate provisions are the most solid parts of the bill right now. I've been told by more than one Senate office that that is largely a product of just how much the business community has for years supported critical action on climate change in the policy realm. So that's a victory. But let's hold the whole package together so that we can get all of our House members to pass it once and for all. If you'd like help in figuring out what should your tweet look like? What should your statement look like? We're very happy to help you write that. We have a whole wakelet of corporate supportive statements that we've amplified repeatedly. And why is this so important now if you're a company that's already expressed your support? Let me say that after the House passed the bill, unfortunately, some of our major trade associations took the opportunity to put out messages of opposition. You may have seen the Farm Bureau put out a really negative message about Building Back Better. The National Association of Manufacturers has done the same against the bill. And unfortunately, we've seen a trail of negative advertising from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the Business Roundtable. Really unfortunate. That's all I'll say about that. If any companies are members of those groups, it makes sense to stand up and say you don't agree with them. You all are climate leaders in your own right, and we really need to push back against that narrative. I'm zeroing in on Senator Manchin, but you know it's always possible that we would lose another moderate in the Senate as well, like Senator Sinema, like Senator Tester. We certainly hope that doesn't happen, but the surround sound support that the business community understands the cost effectiveness of the Build Back Better package and the reason that it's important to invest now, given the cost of inaction, it just could not be more important. So I'm asking for your voice. I'm asking for one last push before the end of the year. If we can get this through, we will all have cause to celebrate come January when this is finalized. And I'm going to leave it at that. I'm thrilled to turn it over to someone who needs no introduction, Avi Garbow, our good friend from Patagonia, who's been at this for a long time, both from the government side and from the private sector side. And I'm also looking forward to answering your questions. So you want to take it away, Avi? Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks, Anne. Thanks, Mike. I've got enormous respect for the BLab community for the advocacy and the leadership that Ann and the Ceres folks do. So can only echo, I guess, everything that Ann has already said and that Mike said by way of the introduction. What I thought I would do just in a couple minutes is certainly not to cover the specific ground that Ann did, but just to reflect a little bit on why we at Patagonia advocate, with the hope, I think, that you'll see some relevance in your own voice, and we can kind of collectively figure out how we bring that business voice to Capitol Hill and to elsewhere to make some positive change. So I want to just kind of do a little historical deep dive into some Patagonia things, but you'll see how it bears some relevance to our thinking about these issues today. So if you dial back, we're approaching, I guess, our 50-year mark of being in business at Patagonia. And back in 1972, the Chouinard Equipment Company, which was really the predecessor to the Patagonia of today, issued one of its first catalogs. And at the very beginning of that catalog, our founder, Yvon Chouinard, and his partner, Tom Frost, wrote this. They wrote, "No longer can we assume that the Earth's resources are limitless, that there are ranges of unlimited peaks extending endlessly beyond the horizon. Mountains are finite, and despite their massive appearance, they're fragile." And Yvon ended that introductory statement by saying, "Remember the rock, the other climber." And I think, and again, this is kind of how we feel generally at Patagonia, that it was an early and unmistakable recognition of the connection between our business and the environment. And I like to think that that's kind of how this experiment of Patagonia began, when we try to exist to drive change and to save the planet. You fast forward about 20 years or so, in the latter part of the 90s, we put out a 15-page pamphlet. It had no product in it, but it was simply titled "Louder Than Words." And it was really meant to answer the question that many had been asking, what's a rag seller doing on the environmental soapbox? By the way, a question we still get asked almost daily. And on the back of the pamphlet, we put some, shall we say, fan mail from a resident of Grants Pass, Oregon, who was politely upset by our support for a forest protection group working in the area. And he wrote at the time, "Stay out and stay home, mind your own business." And I guess the point that I want to make here and what we printed there was that was exactly what we were doing. We recognized that the connection between a business that benefited from a healthy environment and public lands and landscapes that inspire recreation. So we needed to help protect them. A lot of times I've heard more recently people, certainly in the climate context, talk about a quote from noted conservationist David Brower, said famously, "There's no business on a dead planet." Very true, of course. But I like to point out, certainly internally and to others, that you don't need to go that far to find the inherent linkages between a healthy business and a healthy community. You kind of see this everywhere you look. And so I don't think, people tend to go to extremes here, but as long as we can kind of make that connection to see why as a business we should care about in environmental and social issues, that's when our voices are going to carry the greatest weight. Now, what does our advocacy at Patagonia look like? I've talked a little bit about why we advocate. It's kind of built into our DNA, but how do we approach it? First, at Patagonia, although my title is the environmental advocate, we've got a policy team, we've got a communications team, but we show up in a variety of ways. And when we look to make a difference, and as the title of this webinar is, how do you get your voices to be heard? We really look across the spectrum of our employees and our teams. So we've got an environmental activism team. We've got, as I said, a communications and a policy team. We pull our lawyers in, for a variety of advocacy roles. We've got a materials innovation team that focuses on product, but that focus and those innovations really help drive the leadership and the kind of leading by example that we try to embed into our advocacy. We've got a logistics team that works on these issues and so on. And we show up in a variety of ways, right? We use our bullhorn, we tweet out and use social media. We try to lift up the voices of historically marginalized communities. Patagonia is, I think, quite famous for its storytelling capacity. And so if you go on our website, there's a lot of time and energy devoted to environmental stories, which is a way of advocating for the issues that we think are important. We financially support grassroots organization. And I will also say sometimes our advocacy lands us in the courts of law. And of course, working with the BLab folks, working with Anne and others at Ceres in the halls of Congress and in state capitals. I also like to think that our advocacy is working with and learning from folks like you that are on this call, from other companies in the B Corp community, working with Native American tribes, and also we're a global company. So we're constantly looking for opportunities to show up where our voice is needed. For us, the problem has never been, whether we could find things to advocate. I think it was in some ways being spread too thin. And so certainly when it comes to climate action, there are an array of things that we strongly support. Anne mentioned so many things that are found in not just the kind of Build Back Better Act, but the bipartisan infrastructure bill, so more that needs to be done. And so while we kind of advocate for all of that, we also try to narrow our focus on some particular subsets, if you will, on the climate issue. For us, that revolves largely around nature-based solutions. We've got a tilt towards regenerative organic agriculture, but we also pay close attention to some of the core regulatory activities, some of which Anne touched on. So the methane reductions, the power plant greenhouse control rulemaking that's underway at EPA, always focusing on kind of just transition elements there. We're also paying close attention, by the way, not a climate issue, but to clean waters issues. So 2022 in many ways is going to be a pivotal year as the Biden administration looks to reverse what many of us call Trump's dirty water rule, and will put out a new rules governing jurisdiction under the Clean Water Act for rivers, oceans, and lakes. And I guess aside from what many of us view as the core environmental mission of Patagonia, we also advocate for a strong democracy. So for voting rights and election integrity and things like that, which in this country, at least, we think is the foundation on which all of our environmental stewardship and advocacy is based. I want to kind of show, I guess, conclude by wrapping this up and make the point about how our voice is heard, because I think it applies to everybody here. However Patagonia shows up and whatever issue we show up on, it is always as a business. And Anne made the point that a lot of times people in Congress want to hear from small and medium-sized businesses. That is precisely what sets us apart, what sets you apart from so many in the environmental NGO community and other kind of community partners that we have. It is our voice as a business sending in some ways the same message, but in some ways a message that only I think a business can carry. So, for us, the business voice and advocacy, whether it's right or not, we acknowledge carries a great deal of weight with many decision makers. I've spent plenty of time myself in a variety of governmental positions in different administrations, and I can assure you that that the conference rooms and the tables and the calendars of senior government officials are being occupied and taken up by businesses who are opposing strong environmental standards and who are standing in the way of aggressive and needed climate action. And that's why it's increasingly important for businesses like Patagonia, for businesses like yours, for the B Corp community, and for those who are Ceres members to actually provide that counter and make the important point that business cares and sees the links between a healthy business and a healthy environment. So for us, we do all the things we've talked about, but you don't need to have the history of Patagonia or the history of Dr. Bronner's or somebody else to advocate. You don't have to have the same level of resources. You don't need the same level of experience. And you certainly, by the way, don't need to show up on every issue. Oftentimes, by the way, it is the local or state issue in which your advocacy, I think, can carry the most weight. So I don't want folks to get the misimpression that in order to be a good, useful, and strong advocate, you have to always be visible, if you will, kind of on the national stage on some particular issues. So find the issue, I think, that is authentic to you and go out there and carry on your commitment. I guess the last thing I will say, and just to kind of circle back to what Ann was talking about, this is an incredibly important time. There's no way to minimize what's going on in Congress now and the opportunity that we have. So the calls to action that Ann has laid out for us, I think are urgent, and I think we all need to take advantage of the moment that's in front of us. So I'll stop there. Maybe we'll have some time for questions later on, but really pleased now to turn it over to Kevin at Dr. Bronner's.
Thank you, Avi. And what a pleasure and honor to be on a panel with partners of Dr. Bronner's that we respect highly. And we've heard from Avi and Ann and Mike from BLab. Great intros. And I think they've actually taken a lot of my points, but I think I'll still reiterate some of the things that have been mentioned. So again, my name is Kevin Lee, he, him pronouns, and I'm calling in from the unceded lands of the Kumeyaay Luiseno people, or San Diego County here in California. And I don't always get to tell the story of Dr. Bronner's, how it started as a company, but I think it is crucial to kind of share that a little bit of the history. I don't have a lot of time, so I'll do an abridged version and just kind of mention that Dr. Bronner's, we are a personal care product company in the natural products industry. And we were founded by Emanuel Bronner. And Emanuel Bronner really kind of founded, he saw an organization that was more of an advocacy organization. And he used his soaps, his packaging, his labels to share his message of all one love for the planet, all one love for each other. And that is a legacy that we still carry on. So if you have seen our products, you'll notice that there are a lot of words on our packaging, and those are most of it are the original words of Dr. Bronner's. So yeah, we sell soaps, we sell coconut oil, and we just recently launched regenerative organic chocolates. So that all one ethos is really important to our company, and we'll go on to the next slide. Now I'll say the all one principle or all one ethos is the guiding North Star for some of our cosmic principles. We have 6 cosmic principles. They are to work hard and grow, to do right by our customers, to treat employees like family, to be fair to our suppliers, to treat the earth like home, and to fund and fight for what's right. And so for today's conversation, I get to talk about that intersection between cosmic principle number 5 and 6. So treating the earth like home, our environmental values and our initiatives, and our philanthropy and also advocacy, funding and fighting for what's right. So next slide. As I mentioned, as I started off, Dr. Bronner's has always been kind of advocating for things. And over time, we've been able to engage in things at a national level and also from a business industry kind of way. And so here are some of the things that we have plugged our efforts into. So Victory for Hemp, battling for use of hemp products in US products. We've advocated for non-GMO labeling. We've fought for fair pay and securing minimum wage increases in different states, but of course nationally. And our most recent campaigns are Heal Soul and Heal Earth. So Heal Soul is legalizing psychedelic therapy, and then Heal Earth is our regenerative organic certified certification. And that is a partnership that we started with Patagonia and the Rodale Institute. And it is, of course, promoting regenerative organic agriculture. So we've always had, throughout our company history, we've plugged into advocacy efforts, but I would say more recently in the last couple of years, we've been now a little bit more serious about climate advocacy in all kinds of ways, in the ways that Avi just described for Patagonia. So of course, business practices, national campaigns, but recently really working in tandem with some of our partners like at BLab and Ceres, and of course, advocating at the local level. So next slide. On this slide, I have a diagram that shows our 3 concentric circles of action for plastics. And before I actually go into the slide, I wanted to mention that Dr. Bronner's declared that we would become climate positive by 2025. That's a big goal, and it's not far off from what a lot of B Corps have declared, going net zero by 2030. That was something a lot of B Corps did very recently at COP25. And in addition to having this big climate goal, we've been working on plastics. Our customers have pushed us to work on plastics. And what we've recently realized is that Dr. Bronner's as a company can do as much as we can, but to reach these ambitious goals around climate and plastic, and of course, plastics is a climate issue, but it does deserve its own focus in its own right. We need to think bigger than just company level actions. In order to hit our goals, we also need to collaborate with other organizations and with other sectors and really advocate for broad policies that have large scale systemic change. And so that is our approach to plastics that we are now applying to other environmental issues like climate. So we start off with the company level action, as I mentioned. It is a way, it is acknowledging that companies can measure and report and analyze what they're doing, their footprint, and their opportunities, and then to act on those opportunities, do as much as you can. And then when you hit a limit, and before you even at the same time, you should plug into other industry groups. And so on the plastic side, we've plugged into OSC2's Packaging Collaborative. We've plugged into B Corp Climate Collective, of course, really strong force here that Mike has been leading. And then oftentimes in these industry groups and collaborations with like-minded companies, what I have found and my colleagues have found is that oftentimes at the end of these discussions, maybe hour-long discussions on the calls, we'll acknowledge that there's only so much that these industry groups can do, and that we really need to advocate for larger scale change and policies. And that's kind of the point I think that Mike was mentioning in his intro, and we absolutely agree with that at Dr. Bronner. So we started to advocate for local and state changes. So for example, on the plastic side, plugging into the Plastic Free California ballot initiative. And we were really fortunate to make movement on that. There'll be a ballot initiative in California in November 2022. And we are starting to do that with climate as well. So next slide. On this slide, I just have kind of like a laundry list of things that we've done since 2018 at Dr. Bronner's related to specifically climate advocacy. And just wanted to run through the slide because I think it will paint a picture of the different ways Dr. Bronner's approaches climate advocacy in a very similar way to Patagonia that Avi just expressed. But hopefully it will spark some ideas for some of you all on this call today. So starting in August 2018, we started to plug into the Vista Climate Action Plan update. Vista is a city that Dr. Bronner's is headquartered in, again, in San Diego County. And over the past couple of years, we've shown up to city council meetings and have reviewed the climate action plan proposals and have found that our local city could be bolder. And so we've been showing up to city council meetings, advocating for bolder initiatives in the climate action plan update. In 2019, we joined local climate marches and sit-ins, again, here locally here in Vista and also in the town next over to Vista in San Marcos. We joined other B Corps to declare net zero by 2030 and also supported the We Are Still In effort. Just earlier this year, Mike sent around a letter to B Corps asking B Corps to sign on to a letter urging the SEC to create mandatory climate disclosure, and Dr. Bronner's was happy to sign on to that. Our president, Mike Bronner, participated in the America's All In Hill Day earlier in this year and during the summer. And that was led by a joint collaboration with B Corp and Ceres. I believe Ann Kelly was very involved in that, so we want to thank Ann for that. Mike Bronner also signed a letter supporting ag conservation funding in the Build Back Better Act earlier this fall. And of course, very recently, Dr. Bronner's participated in the Call for Climate Now campaign, in which we did social media campaigns for consumers, but we also saw an opportunity to plug in our employee base into this effort. And we were able to call into our local reps office to the point where our local reps and the folks on the other on the phone line were like, oh, are you from Dr. Bronner's? We already know the points you're going to make. Thank you for calling. And so I think my takeaways for this call, again, it's kind of echoing things that have already been said, is that all businesses can plug in many ways. And I would urge folks to start plugging in locally. So showing up to city council meetings, see what your local city's climate action plans are, and see if you can advocate for a bolder action plan. Call into county board of supervisor meetings and state meetings. And I think Avi is right. What I've noticed at these local meetings is that these city council members really value the voices of small and medium-sized businesses. And I think what we're discovering at Dr. Bronner's is also that these city councils, especially in purple areas and red areas, they really listen to their chambers and chamber of commerces. And that is an area that Dr. Bronner's hasn't really plugged into much yet, but I think it is on the docket that we certainly want to start doing that, because they hold a lot of power. So there are ways to advocate for policies at the local level and in a very powerful way. And I would also say to engage your employee and customer base, and that you don't have to go at this alone. We've plugged into efforts that have been led by BLab and Ceres and other industry groups. And so hopefully it is not daunting, and that you find optimism in the efforts already out there for all of you to plug into. So I think with that, I will hand it off to Holly, back to BLab.
Thanks, Kevin. It's wonderful to see some old friends on this call today. I'm really excited to be here. I'm going to quickly update you on 2 ongoing projects and then get into some exciting plans for 2022. So some of you may know that BLab itself actually issued our own policy white paper back in September 2020. It's built on the idea that while voluntary change has been incredibly important in building, our movement thus far, it's not moving fast enough to solve the grave problems that we see across our society, like climate change. And that's, been echoed, I think, by many of the speakers here today. And so in that policy agenda, we basically assume that we need mandatory change. We need policy change that impacts the entire economy and ensures that we're not using Band-Aids to fix a fundamental systems change problem. One of the main goals of that policy agenda is the idea that our economy would work better. It would serve all people and our planet better if all large companies, public or private, were governed like B Corps, like you. That they should all have to bake stakeholder consideration into their DNA, legal DNA. So we've been doing a lot of work building relationships around that idea, both with the administration and with leaders in Congress. And it's looking like we might have a potential Senate bill in early 2022, which is super exciting. And if you're interested in learning more, I'd be happy to connect with you and really explain those policy ideas in more detail, because they are pretty complicated. We've also been working to build consensus and collaboration amongst our fellow ecosystem organizations, so other nonprofits that work with sustainable business or investors or community organizations. So in April 2021, we launched an effort called the Coalition for Inclusive Economic Growth that's focused on moving towards stakeholder capitalism, but then also on reinvigorating community investing. That coalition is now more than 60 different organizations strong and has been engaging with leaders across the administration and with Congress. Finally, I'm incredibly excited to launch a new effort in 2022 to really double down on our policy work. I have come to the realization that there is a tremendous opportunity in the B Corp community for companies like you to be the voice for change on many different policy issues. We're being recognized as kind of the counterpoint to voices like, the Chamber of Commerce and the BRT, and that's a tremendous opportunity for us. But really, in order to effectively live into that potential, we'll need to create kind of the infrastructure and collaboration opportunities, but also the knowledge amongst members of the community that have never engaged in policy advocacy before. So to do that, we're going to be launching a series of policy trainings for the B Corp community that will be focused on kind of building those muscles and supplying them with the tools and resources they need to be effective advocates. Whether they go out and advocate on issues like climate change or stakeholder capitalism, or on their own issues like opioid addiction or human rights, we want to make sure that the B Corp community has the potential to be the voice for policy change. The other things that we're thinking about launching are a leadership group of certified B corporations that are very active in policy advocacy, who kind of want to come together and help advise us on this process and work with us on engaging leaders in Congress and the administration. And finally, we want to launch an effort to provide more avenues for collaboration amongst B Corps who want to engage on policy advocacy with each other. So to do that, we're hoping to host bi-monthly or monthly calls where companies can get together and talk about initiatives that they're engaged with and invite other companies to participate. So I would love to work with any and all of you on this new project in 2022. Feel free to reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat, and I look forward to hearing from you. I tried to go really quickly because I don't think we have much time, Mike.
Holly, you earned some extra kudos points with me there for keeping us right on track for Q&A. Very much appreciate it. And so we do have the next steps up here. I'll leave this up for folks to digest as we answer questions. I don't think I saw a question arrive over the chat window, but feel free to add them now live if folks would like it. We do have some questions that were submitted when everyone registered, so I will shift over to those. One question that came up a few times was asking, how can a company make it easier for employees to participate in advocacy? So the question is, how can a company make it easier for employees to participate in advocacy? And I'll open that up to our speakers to see if there's any initial guidance that comes to mind.
Well, I'm happy to just chime in, and maybe it sounds too simple, but involve them. You know, when I mentioned that Patagonia's got quite a number of people that we draw on for our advocacy, all of whom are contributing, that's by design. Our advocacy unit, if you will, is not necessarily segregated from the rest of the business. Everybody is invested in this work, and so everybody has a voice. And so we actively, involve folks in strategy meetings. We encourage employees to get out. We provide a lot of information internally about opportunities, both again at the local, state, and federal levels, to make your voices heard. So and then of course, take advantage of all of the resources that Mike, your organization has, that Ann and Ceres have, but allow, I think, a greater number of people to participate. That's where you really lift up their voice.
Thanks, Avi. And yeah, that reminded me of the third next step here about the Call for Climate Now campaign. So on the Climate Collaborative website, if you search for, and you have the link here as well, the Climate Collaborative Call for Climate Now they have materials that folks can use to share the dial-in link with employees and pre-scribed messages. So that would be a great way as leadership to support it. And then even if you're, dialing in now as an individual employee, any individual can call the number on the Call for Climate Now campaign, and you'll be plugged into your 2 senators and a House member. So that's still live. And I certainly also just added my own self a to-do to call Senator Manchin on Friday when we have a little bit of a slower day there. So I have certainly been a part of a few campaigns that fill up voicemail inboxes and drive change, as Kevin alluded to. So I think those are two easy ones for everybody to try the dial-ins.
Yeah, and if I may jump in, like obviously just all of them, and I would also say sometimes there needs to be a lot of handholding, even if the Call for Climate Now campaign was really easy to do on the individual level, just dialing and following the instructions. We have a lot of employees who have never ever engaged politically, and so this is daunting. And so we acknowledge that, and we were really intentional about providing resources and opportunities. So for 1 week, we held 6 lunchtime sessions, or we have different shifts. So we had 6 lunchtime sessions where people could come and learn about the campaign, and we read the script together, and then we designated time for people to call, spend 10 minutes calling. And I think that really helped. And then of course, providing translators, and it was really fun employee engagement opportunity as well. But sometimes it does have to be a little bit more intentional and bring in a lot of handholding. So that's the only tip I would add to that as well.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, what I also heard there too is bringing in folks that are new to advocacy into the fold. As someone who's been working on climate activism for the last 10 years or so, there's many of us that, are the regulars, and it's taxing, fighting, it's an uphill battle on climate. So the more people we can bring in makes the work a lot lighter. And 2022, I think, is going to be a fun year. I mean, it's a once in a 12-year window to get a lot of things passed. So if ever there was a year to kind of get involved locally with your local committee on either party to endorse climate policies and candidates, I think 2020 is one that we're all going to have to dive in and could lead to some really good benefits that make its way back to our household. I certainly hope the child tax credit continues personally. That did not go unnoticed for me. $300 check each month. So excellent. The one last quick question I saw was, if we could break down how the Build Back Better package will impact an individual business, as an example, or the bipartisan package. I thought, Anne, you might be able to help shed light on that, on taking that down to an individual company.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And just really support the comments about Avi and Kevin just made about getting those employees involved. Really important to do it. A big fan of the Call for Climate Now. And that same link, of course, works for if you want to get your customers involved, but that's a larger topic. The way in which the Build Back Better package will help, yes, we absolutely have to keep that child tax credit in place. It's tempting to dip into talking about the impact of universal pre-K and family medical leave, but I won't do that because that's not my area of expertise. It just happens that I actually support all the other elements of this human infrastructure bill. But on the climate front, what it's going to do primarily is support in a major way the clean energy sector by giving them the tax credits they need, tax credits in many cases in the form of direct pay that really builds up the sector so that we increase the availability and the affordability of renewable energy for you all as businesses who are seeking to purchase renewable energy, to do PPAs, to have access to renewable energy. It should just do a tremendous amount to build up that sector in the way that we need to do it. We all know the barriers to accessing renewable energy. Same with energy efficiency programs that are going to be completely built up. I think that's really the most fundamental. There's also really crucial public funding for resilience. And as businesses that have suffered from business interruption, from extreme weather events, we absolutely have to invest in resilience. And that's both this bill and the bipartisan infrastructure package. So there's no question that it's a business forward bill that will support us all and support your communities at the same time.
Appreciate it. And yeah, I appreciate the communications I've seen from Ceres too, highlighting a few businesses that supported a bit of a tax increase across the board, knowing that the return on investment of, an ounce of prevention on climate is much less expensive than a ton of cure on the back end. I'm calling in from Philadelphia, where we had one of our entire big towns of Manayunk underwater, and the first floor of all the businesses on the main street were destroyed. So I think certainly many businesses in the front lines of climate are hoping we can work together here and have a more resilient system. Excellent. I think we can, since we're at time, we can plan on answering the additional questions over our follow-up email. So we'll be sure to address them. And I do thank our speakers for joining us here today. I think it was great contributions across the board. Good seeing our familiar faces here, and I'll leave us, it's heavy, it's a heavy topic. So over Christmas break, I do recommend folks watch the Kiss the Ground documentary. I'll leave you with that positive note. It's a great overview on regenerative agriculture and helps us learn how we can leave the land a bit better than when we found it, while also being very entertaining. And I think the Dr. Bronner's founder is featured in it as well. So I'll leave that for folks as additional homework over the holidays with family. That'll give us, I think, some great hope for storing carbon into a living soil. Thanks again, everyone, for joining, and we will certainly share out the recording here. So looking forward to connecting with you over the next many years here as we nudge things forward. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks all.